In this video, we're going to cover a few of the basic concepts of utilizing keyframes inside Toon Boom Harmony. But before I do that, I do want to do a couple housekeeping issues to make working in Harmony a little bit better. Now, if I, in Harmony, go to my preferences, which on the Mac will be under the Harmony pull-down menu, and then you can choose Preferences. On Windows, it will be under Edit. So I go and select Preferences, and what we want to do is find the option that says Focus on Mouse Enter. And by default, it's not checked, but I want it checked. And the reason for that is then, when I'm in my program, wherever my mouse is, that becomes the active window. So I don't have to click on something like clicking on this keyframe, drawing on the stage. I don't have to do that to make it become active. I just move my mouse to the respective window. So if you noticed how this red box indicates what the active window is, was happening in the videos before, and it wasn't occurring that way on yours, and you might have wondered, maybe it's because it's being recorded or something else is going on. The real reason is that I had the Focus on Mouse Enter selected. Now once it is selected, wherever I am, if I use the number 1 or number 2 key, either in the standard keys or in an extended keyboard, and press those, it will zoom in. So I can zoom out, I can zoom in to adjust my view. Now anytime I've zoomed and want to just get back to the standard full view, Shift and the letter M as in mouse, and that will bring it back to being correctly viewed. Now sometimes when you are drawing, especially if you're using a drawing tablet, your hand moves in a certain direction. So I'm trying to draw vertical lines right now and finding it a little bit awkward to do so because it's not following the natural motion of my hand, which is to be at an angle. So trying to be vertical, but my hand wants to go this way. And there's a way to rotate our drawing. Now if you're on a Apple or Mac computer, if you hold down Command and the Option key, it pulls up your artboard, your animation wheel, and now I can spin it, so I can turn it. So now, actually I just turned it the wrong way, I was keying off of what was there. So now I can move my hand in a natural manner. So if you're on Windows, it would be Control-Alt. Allows you to spin your stage so that you can draw in the direction that your hand is most comfortable moving on your drawing surface. And again, the same way that we reset after we zoom in or out, Shift the letter M brings us back to a standard view. So these are just some nice, easy things that we can do to control our view when we're working. Now, something else that we will sometimes want to take advantage of, I'm just going to add in another drawing layer. So I have another drawing layer, and now when I'm drawing on this layer, it's like, well, wait, which layer? I can't really tell where my drawing, which layer I'm drawing on. But we can isolate a layer without having to turn off or solo. I mean, I can solo a layer, so it just shows me that. And that's in the timeline where I look at the layers. The eyeball turns a layer on or off, but if I just click solo, it's going to show me that one. So when my project has 50 or 100 or 200 layers, and I want to work on just one, solo is easier than trying to turn off a bunch. But if I want to minimize the current layer I'm working, but still see the other layer, I can do that by clicking on Lighttable. So I have this little light bulb icon that I can click on right here, lower left corner of the stage window or the camera window, and then I can make that work. Now another nicety that we've talked about before and it's worth mentioning is the letter O. Now I can click and drag to resize my drawing instrument while I'm working. And so again, if you want to practice drawing straight lines, it's much easier to rotate your view while you are doing it. Now if I want to make my brush smaller, or pencil, I'm using the pencil tool, then I can make it smaller. So it can go bigger or smaller and see what's there. And it works with color too, so that if I have color here on this layer, now I go back to the first layer, we can see how it grays that out. Now if I draw green on this layer, and we go between these layers, we can see how it ghosts the other layer, so we can tell which artwork is on which layer while we're working. So Lighttable is really useful when we are working. Now we're going to reach a point where, when we're drawing, that we will draw a shape and want to fill it in with a color. And let's say I'm not going to use that blue, I'm going to make a new blue, so I'm just going to click plus in my color palette, double click on the swatch, and I can mix a new color. Now we have an option right here, multiple wheel mode. If I click on that, now you can see how it gives me I can just change what I'm looking for within hue. Then I could even go and change the saturation of that color. If I wanted to weaken it, change the value of it, or I could mix RGB values as I go as well. So there's a lot of ways we can work with. We can go back to single mode if we want. Multiple mode is quite useful when you're mixing colors because it's sometimes hard to get the exact color you want in the single wheel mode. So now if I grab the paint bucket, we can see, oh, I see I'm on that layer. I thought I drew it on the other layer where it would have been clean. So let me try again. Actually, what we're going to do, just to make it easier to see what's going on, we'll just add one more layer. Use the pencil tool. So I'm going to draw a couple shapes here. One is closed, one is going to be almost closed, and one is not closed at all. Now if I grab the paint bucket tool and click on that shape, it fills it. Now if I click here, it filled it. But that's also because I now have it set to close. I think last time I worked with it, I was using large gap. Now if I say no closing gap, I can try and go, and this shape is not closed. I did not close that path. We can see, and I'll just solo the layer to make it even more clear. So it's not closed. But if I do choose to close the small gap, let's see if that's enough. Nope. Medium? Nope. Large? Oh. Apparently now it doesn't want to close it. As we're trying to fill it. I'll make the gap a little tighter. Because sometimes you will draw something and not realize it's not, oh, but I don't want to fill it with black. I want to use my purple colors. You won't realize you didn't close it. You think you did until you zoom in and find out there's a gap. But now if I look here, there's really no way I can close that gap with what we have there. But there is a tool called the stroke tool that I can use. Now the stroke tool allows me, I can just draw a straight line between, and now it gives me a dialog and says I've added a stroke, but it won't be visible unless you activate show strokes from the view menu. Okay. So I'm here, I don't see a stroke, but now if I go and grab my bucket, it fills it. So under view, show, and choose show strokes, so that now we can see it shows the path and what we've drawn. And if I use the stroke tool again, I don't have to create a straight line, but it could be a line of any shape that I want. So when we look at it, we can see how that now gives us the ability that we don't always have to close the gap while we're working. Oh, I thought I switched tools. Apparently I didn't take, which is why nothing was happening. So we can see now I can even delete the stroke that's there or the fill and put something else in if I so choose. So when we're doing this, it's common sometimes you will want to close a gap like that and then fill with your paint bucket tool. You can see that that one is being disagreeable again. So sometimes we need to give it a little bit of help. And I was trying to use the paint bucket like the select tool in dragging, but the paint bucket is a click tool, not a drag tool. Where the select tool, if I don't have to go around to choose something, I can just swipe into it. And I was kind of just so thinking about, oh, I'm using the select tool, that with the paint bucket I kind of view it the same way. So that's why I was having those issues. So when a tool doesn't behave right, sometimes you just need to back up and think about, okay, what's going on and how can I fix this to make it behave a little bit better. All right, so that's a little bit about working with the tools, some niceties, and other things. Now what we want to do is move into talking about keyframes and working with that. So I'm going to start the clean document and go grab my pencil tool, and I want to go a little smaller with that pencil tool, and I didn't really want to go smaller. I forgot I was zoomed in, which is why I'd... Alright, so here we go. Got a circle there. I'm going to go grab paint bucket there. Just put a little highlight on it so I can see what's there. And now I'm going to turn off strokes. I don't want to see those at the moment just because I find that they're kind of distracting for what I'm doing. So with my artwork drawing, when I want to animate it, what we need to do is we need to add in a peg. So Harmony Premium is encouraging us to follow the proper workflow, which is to not animate the drawing, but to animate a peg. Now a peg is a control object for the layer. So currently I'm going to rename my layer here ball. And the reason I'm doing that is then we'll see what happens when I add a peg to this layer. And I have the little icon down here, add peg. With the layer selected, I can also click on the plus and choose peg. It also happens to be Command P. Command P, or Control P if you're on Windows. In other programs, P would be for printing, but, well, we don't print out of an animation program, we animate. So I add that peg. Now we can see it added in an additional layer, and it calls it ball-P. The P represents the peg, and we can see how now this ball layer is a child of the peg. So there's this little triangle here. I can collapse that and look at it, and now we can see that we have the ball peg and then the ball itself. To animate, what we want to do is use the animation tool, or the transform tool, to actually animate. And we need to then select the peg to do it. One thing we can do is with the animation, or the transform tool, in its properties we have an item called peg selection mode. So what it does is when this is active, so if I click, because if nothing's selected, now I click here, it selected the ball. And you can see now I can move the ball and work with it. But what we generally want to have happen is we want to select the peg. And now when I select the peg, we'll see it chooses it and it gets this yellow overlay. If I select the artwork, it gets kind of a purple overlay. So when you select your layers, if it looks more purple than the original artwork, you're selecting the drawing layer. If it looks like it has a yellow overlay, you have selected the peg. And the peg is what we want to select. Now before I start moving this, I do want to point something out, and we can see that there's a little blue dot in the dead center of the screen. That is the origin point for this peg. So all transformations that we do are going to take place in relation to that point. So if I move this, we can see that point moves. If I go into a corner and rotate, you can see it's rotating around that point. So that point is actually called the pivot point. And the pivot point, we assign its location using the advanced animation tool, rotate. Now if you don't see your advanced animation toolbar, then you can right click and choose advanced animation, and then that will put those tools on whatever window you select them on. So you could choose it up here, you can choose it down here. So yeah, we can kind of, I could dock it in between, or I can leave it where it was. I believe my UI is the default. I tried to set it default, and that's where it's at. So if I choose the rotate, and then go, if I'm here on screen, we can see it's rotating around that pivot point. But we need to reset that pivot point. So to do that, I move my cursor until it's right over the pivot point and drag it to the point I want it to pivot on. So if I want to pivot on the bottom, so it moves from there, I put the pivot point there. If I want to pivot from the middle, I put it here. So if this is a ball and this ball is going to move or do something, it's nice to maybe pivot around its center. But to animate, we typically use the transform tool, because now the transform tool allows me to rotate. It allows me to translate, or if I grab a corner. If I put my cursor outside the corner, we get the little round arrows indicating it's going to rotate. If I go to a corner, I can scale it. So now, if I want to animate, I usually want to remember this first place or position where I am. And to do that, what I want to do is insert a keyframe. Now on my toolbar in the timeline, I see where it says KF. That's insert keyframe. It has a little plus on it. I can click on that. It also tells me F6. So if I use the function key F6, that will also add in that keyframe. So I can click and put that in, or I can use F6 to do it. So now this is my starting position. Now if I go out, I'll just go 10 frames, and we can see my artwork disappeared because the exposure is only 1 frame long. So what I'm going to do, and this is a good idea when you're animating, is you actually collapse the animation down to just looking at the peg. I will go to the end of my timeline, and I extend my animation out. And we can right click and extend exposure. We can also use the function key F5, which is the easiest way to do that. Now if I look at my timeline again, we can see how now those frames did extend out. So we have a keyframe at frame 1. Now if I go to frame 10, if I move this, what we're going to see happen is I get a little line between these, and now I have another keyframe. And my object is now animating. Now if I go here and rotate that, so we can see it slides, and now it rotates. Now I don't have to only do one transform. This group of 10 frames, I'm going to move it. I am going to rotate it 180 degrees, and then I am going to scale it. Now if I want to keep it proportional, I hold down the Shift key while I'm scaling it, and kind of want it to stay, so it's kind of on the ground, so I don't have a mark or anything that I'm following with it. So we can see, we might need to do some adjustments, but I can move, rotate, and scale, so I can do all three of those things as part of my animating. Now, these keyframes, the line in between them indicates this is a motion keyframe. So what that means is the computer is interpolating or calculating what needs to happen on each frame in between each keyframe to then help us out. So instead of having to individually draw or scale on each frame of our animation, I just figure out my starting and ending. It's very much like pose-to-pose animation, except the computer is being my helper now. It's figuring out how to work with me. So now if I go to that frame, frame 40, I'm going to scale it back down, going to rotate it about that much, put it about here. And we can see, okay, look how it shrinks back down. But if I don't want the computer to animate that, I just want to go from here to here, what I can do is I can say this keyframe, I don't want it to be a motion keyframe, I want it to be a stop motion keyframe. So we can see on our timeline toolbar with our animation controls, we have set motion keyframe and waiting for the tooltip, set stop motion keyframe. So now if I click that button, the line between those two keyframes just disappeared. And now it holds until we get to that keyframe. So keyframes are really powerful, and we can have a mix of motion and stop motion keyframes. So think of a stop motion keyframe as we're now just holding until we get to the next keyframe. So we just hold on that, hold, boom, we're now in the new keyframe. Now keyframes are also, I can just select those, I can copy them, and now I can paste in. Now we can see it slides back because that keyframe is a motion keyframe. And now we get to repeat those two frames. And I can even highlight. Can highlight some keyframes here. Right click, so we can see we have different options as well as we're copying and pasting those keyframes through this. So it's a pretty easy way, and instead of pasting, I could have also pasted it in reverse, so then it would have reversed those two frames. So that's another option as well. And I can just, once again, I can take a keyframe and I can just move it. So I can put that keyframe anywhere I want it to be on my timeline after I've made it. So sometimes you make your keyframes just frame 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and then you start spacing them out. Or you just space them out like I did here on 10s, and then you decide how you want to adjust that. So now I'm going to go fast and then slower. Now if I want that spin to take place faster, remembering that animations change over time. So right now I've allotted 14 frames for that animation. Now if I shrink that down to 3 frames, we can see how it goes really fast across there. So it's all about how much change over how much time you give it when you are building your animation. So stop motion, motion keyframes, we can add a keyframe, we can subtract a keyframe. I mean, you can click on keyframe. Actually, I'll just get rid of this middle one. Minus, it goes away. But also, notice when I'm here, I'm not on the stage, because if I click up here and hit delete, well, we can see the artwork went away, it went away. Yeah, that's bad. But if I just click on the keyframe here and just get the keyframe, now the keyframe went away, but the artwork did not. So we always have to be aware of our surroundings and what is the active area. And this is where focus on mouse enter is really useful, so that you're always aware wherever your mouse is now the active area when you are working. So motion, stop motion, add and subtract keyframes as you need, move them around, set the pivot point with the rotate tool. That is critical when we are animating, because that pivot point is going to be the point of origin for any of the transformations that you do when you are translating or moving, rotating, or scaling.